Hey, Witch. Good to see you. And hello, everyone. Witch, can you confirm that you can hear me? I'm just testing my audio here. Awesome. Is the quality alright? Last time I think I held it a little too close to my mouth, so I'm moving it around a little bit today. Awesome. Okay, so let me do one more test to see if the presentation works properly. Okay, so I see the slides display. Did they change? I don't know what plosives is. I mean, I think I have an idea, so I will believe you, and I hope this is better. For those of you who are here earlier, to quick update and a correction from my one of my previous streams, actually, because a new discovery was made. So while we wait, let me tell you about it. You might recall I used to talk about those weird bat-winged dinosaurs that evolved alongside the earliest bird ancestors. They were pretty freaking cool. And we talked about how they could fly. And a day after I made this presentation, a new paper was published, actually providing proof against that they were not efficient powered flyers and they couldn't actually have a long sustained power flight. They were most likely gliders, which would just climb onto trees and glide between them. Maybe ambush predators, which would just launch themselves off a tree or off a branch and glide on top of their prey. So, yeah, some people think that the field of dinosaur science and other prehistoric stuff, so paleontology, is a little slow, but actually discoveries get made all the time. And don't be surprised if in a month some other stuff in this video uh, could I move the mic a little too loud. So how about this switch? Is it better? Or this? You have to forgive me. Like those are, the classic Polish sounds. We have a very strong sh thingy, and I will try to control it. Hello, Manson. It's good to see you. Elf strategist. Hello. So elf strategist is also a Slav, so he knows exactly what I'm talking about. Like Polish language is full of whooshing and swooshing sounds. Hey, Ofalov. Hello. We will start in just a few minutes, everyone. So I will take a moment to shut up now and let me switch back to the starting in a minute slide. Just make sure it works. Okay. And I will just go grab my coffee and I will be right back to get started on time. Which streamer? Yes, jacuzzis of despair are an actual thing. We'll talk about them today. So let's give everyone like 2 more minutes to join, and then we'll get started. For those of you who are joining right now, just be aware that I moved my mic around a little bit because, as it turns out, my S was a little too strong, too powerful for headphone users last time around. So if there are any audio issues or if I sound too loud or too quiet, just let me know in the Twitch chat. We'll adjust. Manson, I want that mod. I want it now. Oh, hello, DJ. It's good to see you here. I hope you will enjoy this journey to the end of the Jurassic. They will be ending the Jurassic period and the myths and lies in the Jurassic Park series. Mordorith, precisely. That is precisely it. Elf strategist, that is true, but we are all heathens here. I see more people are joining. We are almost about to start. And it's noon. It is time. Welcome back, Sushi Commander. Let's get this started. Welcome back to the Jurassic, everyone. Today, the title is The Boundary because we'll be talking about the very end of the Jurassic period and the boundary with the Cretaceous, which is the next geological time period in the Mesozoic. What we start with today is just a quick look at the timeline. We are still in the Upper Jurassic, of course, and we are in the very last stage of the Jurassic period. It's called the Tithonian. It is the last stage of the Upper Jurassic epoch. It's just 7 million years old, but lots of interesting stuff happens here. And the first thing is one of the superstars of the prehistory, which is Archaeopteryx. Archaeopteryx appears just as at the border between the previous stage of the Jurassic and the Tithonian and lives throughout the Tithonian. And I want to start by talking a little bit about it. Before we talk about the animal itself, I actually think its history is also pretty interesting. So first, I want to take a look at different body size estimates because there are multiple Archaeopteryx specimens. We know 11 fossils in total, and here we can see the size range for the animal. And actually, the largest one is not Archaeopteryx itself; it's a different species. So just for the record, it's that purple one that is the largest. So let's talk about the history. So first, the animal was discovered in 1961, but the interesting thing about it is that this feather, which it was identified by first, so yes, the first Archaeopteryx discovery was not actually a skeleton, it was a single feather that was given the name Archaeopteryx. Later on, it was reclassified as a different animal. So this was actually not an Archaeopteryx. So after they have given it a deeper examination, under a different light spectrum, they have discovered this was actually a feather probably from a non-Paravian dinosaur, so a dinosaur that was not closely related to birds at all. So, but the name Archaeopteryx stuck, and in the same year, another specimen was discovered, and it got also assigned to that genus. So the Archaeopteryx, it's actually the second Archaeopteryx fossil that is the first Archaeopteryx in reality. What is interesting is that when the animal was first discovered, it was also when Darwin's Origin of Species was being published, which, of course, when you get a discovery like that, an animal that seems to breach the evolutionary line between dinosaurs and birds, that creates lots of heated arguments. So there was a ton of controversy about it. Archaeopteryx didn't make it into the first Origin of Species edition. It actually made it into the fourth edition, and Darwin there, he wasn't even aware how close he was making this quote. So he called Archaeopteryx that strange bird, the Archaeopteryx, with a long lizard-like tail. Shows how little we know of the former inhabitants of the world. At this point, they didn't know that this was, in fact, that link between dinosaurs and birds. So Darwin was shooting a little bit in the dark here, but it turns out he was kind of correct given kind of those reptilian characteristics. The interesting thing about the fossils is that, one, they are priceless. There are 11 of them, but they are incredibly valuable. So we are talking millions and millions of dollars per each. But when it was discovered first by a farmer, its value wasn't known. So he sold it to a museum for a cow, which, you know what? It's not a bad deal, honestly. I like cows. Very early, when the first discoveries were being made, another interesting thing is this animal was so alien to the paleontologists of that era that they didn't know what they were looking at when they had those feathers displayed. So they actually amputated it from the first it was actually the first or second discovered fossil. So one of our Archaeopteryx fossils actually has had its wings destroyed in a process that would normally be just cleaning. Sorry, I hit my microphone. In a process that would normally be just a standard cleanup of a fossil. They understood later their mistake, and boy, they were not happy. So in total, 12 specimens were discovered. I'm talking about 11 because one was lost to theft or private collector. We don't know where it is. So actually, science has 11 at its disposition right now. At first, there was lots of controversy about its name. Some scientists wanted to rename it to Gryphosaurus because, in their opinion, the name Archaeopteryx sounded too Darwinian, and this was the time of this huge controversy around the origin of species, and there was still some classical paleontologists in the field who didn't sign up to the theory of evolution, and they didn't want to associate the animal too closely with Darwin. So there was a lot of political controversy around it. And an interesting cultural fact, there is a 19th century French play which features a woman giving birth to an Archaeopteryx. I don't know why. I don't know what the reason for it is, but it exists. It is a thing. So you can Google it on your own if you want. But that was the history of the animal. Let's talk about the animal itself. So first thing you need to know is that it is not a true bird. We talked about it a little bit last time, that while the separate evolutionary lineage leading to birds starts in the late Jurassic, the birds themselves, the true birds, don't emerge until the Cretaceous. So Archaeopteryx is not a true bird, nor is it a direct bird ancestor. It is very closely related to that direct line, but it is actually an offshoot, a evolutionary experiment, so to say. It is also not the earliest aviale. So aviale is that group of dinosaurs leading to the birds. You know that the earliest one was a little different. It was called Anchiornis. And one of the most distinct features that differentiates it from birds is, of course, those animals don't have beaks at this point. So it has just a snout and teeth in it. It was a flyer. Yes, it could fly, but it wasn't very adept at it. Scientists say that a good analogy would be the way turkey flies like. It probably required some takeoff. FYI, even though it aerodynamically flew like a turkey, it was much smaller and lighter. Flight was very challenging to those early aviale dinosaurs at this point. One thing that probably helped it in flight was the fact that it had a big brain, And in fact, that brain, 1/3 of it was dedicated to sight, which is important because it lived in a forested archipelago environment, so it had to fly between trees a lot, and in fact, it probably led an arboreal life. It lived, like I said, in that archipelago. That is how Europe looked like back then. And in fact, those jacuzzis of despair that I mentioned at first, um, because the waters were very shallow in early European, in the Jurassic Europe, lots of them were super salty. So they were hyper saline. The only thing that lived there were extremophile bacteria. And when Archaeopteryx tried to fly between one island and another, it didn't always make it. So it sometimes fell into a lagoon like that, into that jacuzzi of despair. And because it was so saline, it was actually great for preservation. So this is why we have its fossils that have preserved its feathering so well. So that death probably wasn't pretty, but the fossils we get through it are actually pretty amazing. So what is also interesting is its coloration. You can see it here displayed in kind of those greenish hues. It might not be the most accurate coloring. Most likely it had some black and white mix of feathers. And there is actually an evolutionary reason for it. Because this early, in the evolutionary line of birds, feathers weren't fully developed the way the bird feathers are nowadays. So they wouldn't generate as much lift as modern birds would. But we know that Archaeopteryx flew, and one of the reasons for it is because dark feathers have more melanosomes in them. And one of the things that melanosomes do is they make feathers stronger, a little more stiffer, which means they don't bend so easily against wind. So they can actually generate more lift the darker the animal is. And Archaeopteryx probably was pretty dark with some light coloration. We also suspect it was a nocturnal predator because of how big the eyesight component of its brain was, and it was probably an ambushing animal. But in all honesty, because this is a airborne animal that had all its fossils deposited in the water, we don't have any trace fossils to really deduce its behavior fully. So there is lots of speculation there. So I hope this gave you a better overview of Archaeopteryx. Now I want to show you where it lies in the family tree of dinosaurs. So you remember this tree, probably. So those are all the big two-legged dinosaurs, and in them lies the family Maniraptoriforms. And last time we talked about aviales here with this red arrow, and we talked about how aviales lead to birds. Well, there is one last family tree I need to add here, because aviales are a history of their own, right? And some of those you have met already. Anchiornis was the earliest, and Archaeopteryx is right here, right after it. So still a pretty long way to go until the true birds, so Neorniths, represented by the sky rat here. Neorniths probably appeared about 121 million years ago, but that date isn't actually set for sure. So I'm making it with a question mark here. A few pictures of Archaeopteryx that I want to show you. Again, there is lots of creativity here. Black coloration like this is probably the most accurate for the reasons we discussed a moment ago. So it probably had those visible claws. Again, you can see the teeth here, living on a coast, on a small islands full of trees. That was probably its environment. Again, you can see that most artists portray it with this black and white coloration. And here we have it in flight, probably how it could have looked like maybe during a mating ritual or some sort of territorial scuffle. We don't know for sure. Now, I want you to also take a look at some skulls. So on the top left, you see Velociraptor skull. For the record, Velociraptor, a Cretaceous animal, so not living here, and Archaeopteryx next to it. So you can see how much there is still to go between what looks more like a dinosaur to what looks like a bird. So you can see that in terms of anatomy, this was, even though it was a bird ancestor on that direct lineage, it was much more similar to some of the smaller predatory dinosaurs living alongside it. You can see a direct comparison here. And one more cool picture, I think, showing Archaeopteryx in its natural habitat. This is probably how Europe would have looked like back in the day. And here on the left, one diving into the jacuzzi of despair, and on the right, if you ever had an Archaeopteryx, this is probably how it have looked. It would have looked like on your hand. And again, there is just a ton of art of this thing. This maybe not is not the best, but it shows it just nesting next to the coast. And here is my favorite, Archaeopteryx being an asshole to some pterosaur just biting its tail. And one last picture just showing two of them gliding through the air. There were other members of this family, Archaeopterygidae. One of them is Wenhoferia. That is actually that largest Archaeopteryx fossil that I mentioned at first that got later reclassified as another species. So that is the one. There were other aviales, like the relatives of Anchiornis, not Archaeopteryx. For example, here is Ostromia. A really small animal. You can see it's just a bit bigger than a mouse. And another Alcmonavis. Alcmonavis is actually on a separate branch. When you look here, it is a transitional form between Archaeopterygids and the rest of that family tree of the Avialae. Now, let's talk about other animals that lived in this environment. We are still in Europe, in this tropical archipelago of Europe, and one of the most famous animals that you probably heard about, famous dinosaurs, is Compsognathus. Long ago, it was considered the smallest dinosaur. It is not so anymore. We know some smaller ones. There are two specimens that we know of, one French, one German. The French one is bigger, take from that what you will, but both are assigned to the same species, about a meter long. Oh, sorry, I almost forgot. Even though the German one is smaller, it is actually the size of the baguette. So, filling in this family tree, let's add Compsognathus, where they should rest. You can actually see they're pretty close on this family tree, leading to birds and raptors and close to tyrannosaurs. So they are in a pretty, I would say, noble company. When it comes to how the animal looked like, you probably saw it in Jurassic Park looking like this. Of course, now we know that they were feathered, so this is one image of how it actually should have looked like in the movie. We don't know if it was that fuzzy though. This is another reconstruction with feathery coverage. Gabriel Ugueto is the artist, one of my favorite paleo artists. Some of the art I will show you here is a little conservative, so showing the animal without feathers. Here is a very interesting take. This is an albino, because some dinosaurs probably were albinos. And here, two of my favorite pictures. On the left, Compsognathus slaying a mighty foe that is fighting back. And on the right, I'm actually not sure if it's tripped and fell or if it's taking a sand bath. It might be one of the two. But it's actually, I think, pretty nice. And here, a mighty Compsognathus that just fucked up an Apatosaurus. So, FYI, interesting fact, Apatosaurus went extinct just as Compsognathus entered the fossil record. Coincidence? I think not. So, we talked a lot about the Tithonian Europe. This is like a landscape view of it. I really think it had to have been a beautiful environment. You can see here one of those jacuzzis of despair, shallow lagoons that probably Archaeopteryx fell into. There were, of course, some smaller theropods living along the coast, just walking next to the waves and grabbing whatever the sea threw out onto the beach. But, of course, there were also some marine animals swimming in those waters too. And in fact, this is where I want to transition next. So let's talk about what was in the sea and what was in the oceans. So late Jurassic is really the heyday of ammonites. So there are tons of them. Some of them are smaller, some are bigger. I want to show you a few of them. And some really beautiful fossils we get of them. None of them are huge, but I think they are all pretty nice. The Titanitis is one of the bigger ones. But for the record, this is next to juvenile ichthyosaur. So ichthyosaurs actually got a bit bigger in relation to it, but the ammonite itself is still pretty big. Here is a different picture of it, showing it in a little more detail. Another species of ammonite that I think has just a beautiful shell, you can see the fossil on the right here, is Garniericeras. And some of the art that I think really gets omitted normally is how those shells would have interacted with the environment. For example, a discarded shell of a dead ammonite might have been shelter for some small school of fish. Some crabs, hermit crabs, could have used them as their home back in the day. Some of the art that I think is very rare shows an ammonite actually popping out of the water. They probably would have been quite buoyant and actually able to extend their shells to peek out of the water a little bit. Hey Ben, it's good to see you. And one interesting thing, one of the discussions that scientists are having is whether a dead ammonite would have floated or if it would have fallen to the seafloor. What was the buoyancy? And we actually have a fossil that has settled that argument. They called it the zombie ammonite. I told you I would. Oh, Lady Magnus. I'm so sorry. I saw Magnus. And I was just, simplistic train of thought. It is very good to see you also. Even better than Ben, for the record. So going back to the ammonite, we have a fossil that shows those drag marks that you can see here. I know you don't see it very well with this fossil, but they are actually here. So those are the drag marks. So we know that a dead ammonite, after its head was bitten off, it would have taken up water and slowly fell to the bottom of the and to the seabed and would have been dragged by the current along the sand. So this was probably a pretty common sight back in the day. Here's another picture how a school of ammonites during a migration could have looked like. The species here is called Epivirgitatis, also one of the bigger ones, but just FYI, those are again juvenile ichthyosaurs. So the perspective here is a little cheated, so to speak. Since we are talking about ichthyosaurs, let's talk about some species that lived in the Tithonian. Before we talk about more marine animals, I just want to say that the fossil record is a little spotty in the Tithonian for marine animals, so we don't have that many great examples of them. But one of them is Cryptopterygius, is one of the bigger ichthyosaurs. It doesn't show well in this picture, but it actually had this weird, elongated, a bit upwards pointing snout. It has actually very cool fossil that you can see here, almost a full animal, very nicely preserved. Here you can see, just as a reminder, those animals gave live birth even though they were reptiles. And here some juveniles just popping out of the water. There were more ichthyosaur species, of course. You can see some of them here. The size was on average about 3 to 4 meters, so most of them were about the same size. There were, of course, plesiosaurs. We talked about Pliosaurus previously, but I wanted to go back to it because last time we met, I told you that at the very end of the Jurassic would be the largest pliosaur that lived. And in fact, there is a subspecies of a pliosaur called Pliosaurus funki. And you can see it compared here next to an orca and a blue whale. This was the largest pliosaurus living in the Jurassic, and it was the largest predator in this time period. The only bit of controversy about it is that we don't have many bones of it. The size is extrapolated based on the bones of its fins. So you can actually use those if you have a full fin of the animal to extrapolate the rest of its size, but still it should be taken with a little bit of a grain of salt. You can see a few pictures of it here, chasing prey, popping out of the water. Very characteristic is this narrow snout. That is very characteristic for pliosaurs. Here in the picture with Pliosaurus also is Palvenia. It's a different ichthyosaur, so you can see how big Pliosaurus funki really was compared to some other animals swimming in the waters. We also have those long neck plesiosauroids. One of them is Chimerosaurus. We have very few of them, and we don't have very good art of this one, but you can see it here. I think the more interesting one is this. This is Ophthalmothulae. And Ophthalmothulae lived at the very border of Jurassic and Cretaceous. And what is interesting, it is one of those fossils that show signs of decompression sickness. So it dove very deep, which means that it probably hunted in dark waters. And because the fossil has huge eyes, it probably did too. So it probably looked a little freaky when it was swimming in the water with this long neck and big eyes on its head. And I think this is my favorite art of it. It might not be the prettiest, but if you were swimming in deep water in the very late Jurassic, at the very end of it, you could have run into a freaky boy like this. There were other weird things in those waters. So late Jurassic is really diverse. This is an animal that belongs to the family of no marine reptiles we discussed previously. Pleurosauridae are their own thing. They are those very long-bodied lizard-like animals. They look a little bit like this. And their closest living relative is a tuatara. What tuatara is a reptile, but it is not a lizard. And it stands alone in its family tree. What is different about it is that tuatara is a cold-blooded reptile, unlike all the others. So its body temperature actually is much lower than all the other reptiles living today. And this is actually one of its earliest relatives. Another picture that I think shows the anatomy of the animal even better is this one. Again, Gabriel Ugueto is the artist behind it. There were other marine animals. Like the diversity in the oceans in the late Jurassic is just outstanding. So Thalattosuchians, as a reminder, are fully marine relatives of crocodiles. They are not true crocodiles. They have transitions to a fully aquatic lifestyle. One of them is Geosaurus. You can see it here, not the biggest, but Plesiosuchus, on the other hand, was the largest Thalattosuchian living in the Jurassic. And you can see about 7-meter long animal, which probably made it apex predator in some of the shallow seas of the Jurassic, at least. And of course, let's not forget, there were sharks living there also. Some of them a little like classic. Some of them, like Calorhynchus, a little different. You can see, I don't have a good body size picture, but you can see a tooth of one such shark in the hand here. And there were lots of them. Many of them starting to look like modern sharks at this point. So what I really want to nail down here before we leave the Jurassic is that in terms of big animals, big body-sized animals, Jurassic seas are the most diverse ever. They have the marine life has never been as diverse before the Jurassic and will never be as diverse after the Jurassic. So nowadays, what do we have? We have sharks and whales and dolphins, and that is it. And you just saw how much other types of animals actually swam in those waters. And we didn't even talk about normal fish outside of sharks. We didn't talk about pterosaurs, which would dive into those waters. So it was really an incredible environment. Now, let's go back to land and let's talk about ornithischians. Ornithischians, as a reminder, they are this third branch of dinosaurs. We have two-legged predators. We have four called theropods. We have sauropods with massive bodies and long necks. And the third group is called the Ornithischia. And here, as a reminder, is their family tree, and we'll talk about pieces of it now. First, let's talk about Tithonian Stegosaurus. And in fact, the Stegosaurus itself, because this is where it lives. So the end of the Jurassic is the place that Stegosaurus called its home. Size-wise, there were actually two species of the Stegosaurus. So the Stegosaurus is actually a genus, so a group of closely related species. One bigger, one a little smaller, but anatomically very similar one to another. First, a little bit of history. The first reconstruction of Stegosaurus, those plates were thought to have been armor. So you can see here they have reconstructed them, putting them like plates covering the top of the body. The spikes of the Thagomizer, so that tail, they're multiplied because the scientists assumed there had to be more of them and they were put between those plates. So its name actually means roofed lizard because they thought that it literally had a roof over its whole body. So the name, after the later reconstructions, which are also pretty weird, this is a second reconstruction of a Stegosaurus. Later they realized that those plates were actually vertical and they weren't laying down covering the body, but the name stuck. There's a lot of discussion about what those plates are used for. You know that first they were assumed to have been a defensive armor, and to a degree they probably served that role because they were likely sheathed in keratin with some sharp edges. So even though they weren't armor in the classic sense of the word, they would still probably wound the animal that would try to bite through them. Um, there was also one of the theories saying that they could have been used in the same way that Dimetrodon used its sail, so for thermoregulation to capture heat and help the animal heat up faster. We don't actually have actual proof for that, but that theory hasn't been exactly disproven. Um, One of the ideas, they could have been used as a form of display. It's possible that Stegosaurus was sexually dimorphic, so the plates could have looked a little bit different on a male and a female. So it might have been just a way for them to get laid. We don't know if they could actually pump blood into the tissue around the plate itself. If they could, we could potentially speculate that they could display color, and that could help in mating rituals. When it comes to tail spikes, it is actually much easier to deduce what they were for. So the proper name for them is a thagomizer, and they were used for defensive purposes. We know that for sure because we have found bones of predators with very distinct marks on them that fit just perfectly to a thagomizer spike. And Stegosaurus is a bit infamous for actually being the dumbest dinosaur. And this is what I want to talk about next, which is Stegosaurus is a great segue to discuss dinosaur intelligence. There are two types of dinosaurs that usually get attributed some form of intellect to them in pop culture, with at least most of the society seems to think that the Stegosaurus was the dumbest and that the raptors were the most intelligent. So I will try to disprove that a little bit now. There is a measure called the EQ, so encephalization quotient. I think that's how you pronounce it. I will probably pronounce it in 10 different ways before this segment is over. And what it is a number essentially portraying the relative size of the brain to the animal's body size. It is not perfect, but I will tell you about why in a moment, but I will use it to try and give you an idea which dinosaurs had the highest ratio, the biggest brain relative to their body size, and which had the smallest. So for the Stegosaurus, the EQ was 0.6, and you can see below that sauropods had smaller brains relative to their body size compared to it. Ankylosaurs, which are close relatives to the Stegosaurus, but in a similar body size, had even smaller brains than Stegosaurus itself. On the other hand, on the other side of the scale is a Troodon. So Troodons are close relatives of raptors, but they are a bit smaller and their claws aren't as big. And their encephalization quotient is actually bigger than the dolphins living today. This is why we say that raptors were super smart. So that EQ is 5.8. Compared to some animals living today, dog is 1.2. So, Moon, not so bright if you were to take that as a definitive measure of intelligence. Just 1.2 compared to 5.8 of a Troodon. Chimpanzee, very smart, 2.5. Dolphin, 5.3. All of them lower encephalization quotient than a Troodon itself. Humans, of course, higher brain size to body ratio. Wolves, a little, as it turns out, on average, a little bigger brains relative to body size compared to other dogs. Raptors, I will use that term colloquially, raptors on average about 5.6, and the raven, which is known as one of the smartest birds, 2.5. Now you can derive a lot from this information, but there are a few things to remember. One, EQ was initially conceived for mammals, which dinosaurs are not. So applying it isn't necessarily the best measure to actually evaluate dinosaur intelligence. And in fact, if you apply EQ as an indicator of intelligence, Neanderthal brains could actually get bigger than ours relative to their body size. And we can, with some certainty, based on their technological and cultural remnants of their species, that they were not smarter than us. So this is not a foolproof concept. So what I'm getting add with all this is that brain size and the relative size of the brain to the body is not a definitive argument for the intelligence of an animal. It probably means a little bit, right? But if I was going to speculate, when you look at a Stegosaurus, it has a lot of stuff to coordinate. It has a weapon on its tail. It needs to position its body properly. It probably has some sexual display going on for it, so some societal um, behavior. They probably had to think a little bit. So even though it's smaller, it doesn't mean the brain was misused. So let's not apply our very biased understanding of intelligence versus brain size to extinct animals because we are probably just making shit up. So I hope that has redeemed Stegosaurus a little bit in your eyes. Now, we have talked about it. I want to show you some art of the animal because I think some of the art of the Stegosaurus that you can find online is just amazing. Here you can see on the right, for example, it being bathed in rain. I just love this piece of art. Here, a little graphic. It has just fucked up a Carnotaurus, and it has something stuck on its tail. So you can see some scavengers following it and just trying to join dinner, and Stegosaurus just being a mega chad. Here, again, a scene in the forest, them just moving through the undergrowth. Again, similar, just chilling in the forested environment. Here I want to show you a comparison with Jurassic Park. This is where Jurassic Park actually got it pretty good. Bulkier, like rear part of the body, the plates a little bent backwards, pretty good. So they actually got this one correct. Now, to really appreciate the size of the animal, I think this diagram is best. This is a display of its muscles. This is a massive fucking animal, and you can see it even better in this view. Just look at it front and back. It was essentially a square on legs with some armor, plates, and spikes. So it was a really big creature. And what is interesting about it that you might not know is that it actually had throat armor. You can see it on the left here. This is something you don't see in much of art, but yes, Stegosaurus had additional protection on their throat, which you can probably imagine how useful it would have been if they were flipped on their back and some dinosaur tried to bite their trachea or something. Here is a body size comparison to an elephant living today. So it was actually larger than a modern elephant. And a few more pictures. Here is a young Stegosaurus, a baby. A few of them moving in a pack. Mother with a child. And here again, I promised you more baby dinosaurs. So a baby Diplodocus with a baby Stegosaurus on the left. And I think this is one of my favorite pictures. Maybe not anatomically perfect, but I just really like it. Now, there were other Stegosaurids living in the Jurassic, and one of my favorites living in the Tithonian is Miragaia. This is the beginning of this weird offshoot of Stegosaurs with long necks. There were Stegosaurus with a bit elongated necks. You can see it here. We know what long necks would have been useful for. It probably could have reached a bit higher branches if it reared itself up on its hind limbs. There isn't that much art of Miragaia. Here's one that is interesting. It shows it with speculative features, so with quills on its back. This is interesting because we actually know that some ornithischians, mostly two-legged ones, did have quills like that. So here's one that speculates that maybe Stegosaurus had them too, but we didn't actually find proof of that. And a few pieces of art about Miragaia because I wanted to show it too. None of them necessarily very accurate because there isn't much art of it, which is a shame because I really like this animal. You can see some pieces of art about it. Here just just took a shit and it's kicking at it, but yeah, this is art also, I guess. And there were some other Stegosaurs, like this Centurus is one example. Really massive shoulder spikes on this one. You can probably see how difficult it would have been for a predator to approach it from the side with something like this sticking out. Size-wise, not as large as Stegosaurus. In general, after those streams, I hope you realize that Stegosaurs were a very diverse group of animals. There was a ton of them in the Jurassic and in the Cretaceous also. Stegosaurus is the largest, so they won't get bigger than that, but there will still be a few interesting ones afterwards. There are ankylosaurs living in the very late Jurassic also. One of them is Dracopelta. There isn't much good art of it, unfortunately. This is as best as I could find. So you can see it here. Again, ankylosaurs of this era, they don't have maces on their tails. And you have ceratopsians. We didn't talk about them last time, but we mentioned them 2 streams ago. Ceratopsians, so ancestors of Triceratops. But at this point in the evolutionary history, they are kind of trash. They are much smaller. You can see this frill at the back of the head is just starting to form. And yes, they walk on 2 legs at this point. You can also see they have quills at the back of their tails. And this is in fact a feature that will be retained by Triceratops. You don't see this much in art, but Triceratops did have quills at the back of its tail. Size-wise, again, very small animals, and they will stay like that for a long time before they transition into this massive 4-legged body form. There are a few species of them. You can see examples of a few here. So they were starting to diversify a little bit in the late Jurassic. There were other ornithischians. Those are heterodontosaurids. So again, small 2-legged herbivorous ornithischians. You don't see it well here because they have lots of feathers in the way, but those are the ones with spikes. So size-wise, very small animal. It probably would have been able to climb trees a little bit, and you can see it here with those quills pointing out. So those were the hedgehog dinosaurs that lived in the Jurassic. We also have ornithopods. So ornithopods are, as a reminder, the relatives of duck-billed dinosaurs. And Eutiodon is an early ancestor of Iguanodon. You can start seeing some of this body shape, 2 legs, pointing out thumb, not very big yet, and much smaller, a bit bigger than a cat, but this is where Iguanodon comes from. And likewise, Draconyx, same family line. Now, let's move from land to the skies. First, I want to talk about some pterosaurs. So we have Bellubrunus, and Bellubrunus is interesting because it is one of the smallest pterosaurs ever. On the left, you can see a comparison to a human hand here. So you could have just held it in your hand. There were actually some fish bones found with its remains. So we know it had an piscivorous diet. Sorry, that's the correct word. However, this body shape of the pterosaurs, with long tails, small body, relatively small head, it ends here. The end of the Jurassic is the end of this pterosaur line. After this, they go extinct, and the second family of pterosaurs takes over. So going forward, we will only be talking about pterodactyloids. And in fact, the very end of the Jurassic is where the most famous of them all lives. So Pterodactylus is here, and let's talk about it. First, I want to show you a little bit of art. There's actually a lot of speculation about how big that crest on its head was. It was probably sexually dimorphic, so probably bigger in males, smaller in females, because that's usually how it goes. And it probably grew bigger as the animal grew older. As size-wise, you can see this was actually a small pterosaur. I want to do away with the myth that it would have been able to kidnap a random woman from a street, lift her up, and have her be rescued by a giant monkey. It wouldn't have happened. First, it's small. Second, those animals were very, very light because their bones were hollow, so they wouldn't have been able to lift this much weight. A few more pictures of it here with various takes on the crest. You can see here juveniles, which are speculated to not have had crests at all. It is speculated that the crest would have emerged only as they matured sexually. And here is some of the oldest art of the pterodactyl. When it was first discovered, they didn't know what the hell it was, so it was reconstructed in some pretty weird ways. In fact, on the reconstruction on the left, you can see it's a marsupial reconstruction. Manson, yeah, you're saying possum? Pretty much the same line of thought. Those are how the earliest reconstructions of pterodactyls looked like. Some of them more reptilian, you can see in the Crystal Palace with some of the oldest reconstructions. Here they have this like snake-like head, almost. I'm so sorry, guys. I see that you really like those pictures. But in reality, pterodactyls probably looked a little bit like this, chilling on the coast and just eating some fish. Pterodactylus was pretty vanilla. Let's talk about some weird ones. So Cycnerampus is one of those odd pterodactyloids. The beak is really unique. It is speculated it would have used it to crunch clams. So it would probably eat small crustaceans and other animals like that. Even weirder is Gnathosaurus. You can see those weird teeth protruding sideways. It probably used them to scoop up fish from the water and just increase the surface area uh, uh, which it could utilize to capture the prey when it was moving it through the water. There were some more standard ones also. You can see them here, some with reconstructors with bigger teeth, some with smaller, but you had this weird teeth from hell evolutionary line of pterodactyloids in the late Jurassic. Some a little more standard. You can see lots of experimentation with those head crests in that time. Some bigger, some smaller. This is when they only start diversifying. You can see them getting some big, some medium sized. They will get much bigger in the future. But uh, just as other pterosaurs, pterodactyloids have their tiny boy also. It's Archaeodactylus. You can see it here again compared to a human hand. So just a little bit bigger than the human hand when it spread its wings. So there were lots of those smaller pterosaurs flying around also. We know this animal from a really beautiful fossil that you can see on the right here. And here it is, just chilling in the water. Some pterosaurs were probably capable of some basic swimming. We are pretty sure some of them were divers. They were hunting the same way some birds do nowadays. So they would just, launch from the air to capture a fish in the water. But this one might as well have been, there are those small birds nowadays who just chill in the on the beach and dig in the sun to look for small worms. Those would have probably fed a little bit similar. Now, we go back to my favorite type of pterosaurs, Anurognathes. Those are the pterosaurs without beaks, with very short mouths and big eyes, probably living a night lifestyle. I want to show you a few more pictures of it because this is the one that this group was named after, Anurognathids, and this is Anurognathes. So this is the one that was actually discovered first, and it lives here at the end of the Jurassic. There are lots of different takes on it, some more creepy than others, as you can see here. And here is a movie that could have saved the DC if only Warner Bros. Wasn't full of cowards. The animal is quite charismatic, so you can actually find some statuettes of it online if you want to look for it. Google Anurognathes, and you can buy some. You can see here, we actually have a decent idea of the coloration of the animal. It was darkish, and since it was found in arboreal environment, it would probably have been able to blend pretty well with trees. And one piece of art, which is I think my favorite take on Anurognathes, shows just that. You can see it here. I just love those animals. Here you can see some other pictures of it clinging to tree bark on the right. I don't know if it's. I think the one is it's just being suspicious. The one on the right is just reeing into the ether. That's a really really cool animal. Here are a few cuter takes, not necessarily accurate, but you can see how many artists this animal inspires. And again, you can see it here, hunting at night, catching an insect. FYI, that picture on the right, they didn't have an echosonar. They didn't have the invention that bats would have later, but they had huge eyes, which would probably have helped them actually see the prey as they were following it through the night sky. So again, super, super cute animal. They also probably had whiskers. You can see them here. So I just love them. I would love to have one. And last one, strapping looking boy, just chilling in the night, water in the night. Now, I want to talk about one more thing in regards to them. This is a late Jurassic butterfly called Origramma. And we have a very good fossil of it. You can see it on the left, and on the right, a reconstruction of how the wing patterns would have looked like probably. And when you think about the fact that those butterflies were probably prey of Anurognathus, I want you to take a look at something. One, think about the need to mask yourself, the camouflage, and look at this. Does this not look to you like the face of an Anurognathus? An eye, a mouth, the head shape that you can see here on the right. What you likely see is because Anurognathus was very visual oriented. Some butterflies probably developed coloration that would have made it confusing for an Anurognathus to buy them, because it would see something that looks a little bit like it, and it would have had a second thought, like a split second of hesitation before it took a bite, which might have been enough for a butterfly to escape. So a really amazing example of a relationship between two animals living there at the end of the Jurassic. Another interesting thing, here is a huge moth drinking a dinosaur tear. Now, we talked about small things, let's talk about big ones. Titonian sauropods. Here is their family tree. I'll be talking mostly about this part now. So Diplodocus and its relatives. First, some of the things are dead. Brachiosaurus and Diplodocus are no longer alive at the very end of the Jurassic. Brontosaurus and Apatosaurus are doing excellent, but both Brachiosaurus and Diplodocus have descendants and they live here. And one of them is Giraffa titan. And here is one bone of a Giraffa titan from its leg. It is in fact the largest brachiosaurid, the tallest one at least. And you can see the height here, about 15 meters. And this Brachiosaurus that you saw in Jurassic Park was actually reconstructed based on the Giraffa titan. So anatomy is actually very similar between Brachiosaurus and Giraffa titan, but they still reconstructed the wrong animal. Here are a few pictures of it with some speculative quills, some speculative features. Overall, though, a pretty vanilla animal. That standard brachiosaurian body position, long front legs, very tall, upwards facing neck. And a few more pieces of art of it just chilling in the environment. So some spikes on its back that it probably had. And just it walking next to a forest. There are more other brachiosaurs, of course. You can see two other species here. It's not like Giraffa titan was the only one there. And what is interesting about brachiosaurids, I noticed this was a question someone asked last time. Yes, they probably got struck by lightning. In some cases, when they were walking through a plane, they were the tallest object in the environment. So yes, it is very likely that lightning would have hit them as they were just walking along and just minding their own fucking business. Now, let's talk about diplodocids. As a reminder, diplodocids are different. You see this horizontal body shape, much longer tail. And Barosaurus is in fact the largest diplodocid. You see this much more like a agile, nimbler body shape, more snake-like even. It is larger than Diplodocus. I think the animal looks just amazing. There is some beautiful art of it. You can see it here, an adult and some juveniles next to one another. And in fact, we have some amazing skeletons of it. You can see it on the left here. It doesn't seem that big until you do a close-up and stand underneath it. This is a picture taken by someone who stood just right under the fossil and pointed their camera upwards. So a pretty big animal. And it's also my favorite piece of paleo art, a massive pile of sauropod shit by Bob Nichols. And yes, this is a Barosaurus massive pile of sauropod shit, just for the record. So it is rightfully placed here in the presentation. And here you can see it just walking through a forest, how it would have looked like just towering over the trees. And one more size comparison for the science and for posterity, Barosaurus next to a human figure. And one more, why reach upwards with your neck when you can just break the tree? Isa Luca, see the long tail. I talked about it a little bit last time, so if you want to, you can go to my YouTube channel. I will link it later and see detailed conversation. But in short, a few answers are: it was a weapon, it was a counterbalance for the long neck, and it was probably a communication. It was probably a communication device. So they actually used it to touch one another when they were walking alongside, and probably they could have snapped it like a whip and create a noise to let the herd know that they are right there. And this is my favorite picture of a Barosaurus right about to fuck up to theropods. There were more Diplodocids like this one in Herosaurus, and there were Memenchisaurids, so a different type of sauropod, very long neck compared to the rest of the body, but a bit smaller than a Diplodocid. And you can see at the end of the tail here a small mace that was used as a weapon. Now, I want to talk about some weirder ones. The Dicraeosaurus is a relative of the Diplodocid, but with a shorter neck, and it's much smaller, as you can see here. It also has those taller vertebrae. There's like a hump at the back, at its back, a much longer head. You can see it's a little elongated here. So they're starting to diverge here. They will in fact lead to this weird family of sauropods that are low browsers and have lots of weird funky features on their backs. You can see a beautiful shot of the skull on the left here. And here is one just meeting two Stegosaurians just chilling in the mud. Now, my favorite late Jurassic sauropod is this one. First of all, it has a super short neck when you can just look at the picture and see it here. So it is pretty unique. It was again a low browser, so yes, some sauropods had short necks. You can see how short it was here, really. And next pictures, I just freaking love them. Sorry, not this one, not this one, this one. Yes. So here it is, having a very, I would say, 2020 quarantine body shape, a little chunkier, short neck. Very cute animal. Yes, Ophalov, weird fucky features. That is the proper way scientists say it also. And if this isn't cute enough for you, I hope this is the same animal just chilling next to the water with some butterflies just flying around it. Just beautiful, beautiful sauropod. Now, we talked about animals with short necks. Here is an animal that is all neck. So a Tithonian snake, Parviraptor, probably semi-aquatic snake with some residual legs. We also have mammals, of course, the earliest ones, like the Dryolestis here. What is actually sitting on here is the spike of the Stegosaurus tail. So you can see it was very small. There were some others, like Amblotherium here. I won't be talking much about them right now because we'll talk about them more in the future. Now, we will end with theropods today. First, I want to talk about those boys, so Ceratosaurus. They are still here. We talked about it a little bit last time. Just FYI, those horny boys, they still chill in the late Jurassic. Also, I told you that the late Jurassic is the end of the Megalosaurus, and in fact, last Megalosaurus, the biggest in the species of Torvosaurus, still live here. And one unique specimen of Megalosaurus, called Edmarca rex, is the largest Megalosaurus we know. You can see it on the right here. Reconstruction based on a single bone, so it is a little bit speculative, but still we know this was a big animal. We have some basal theropods like this one, Sturomimus. So it's not any of those, outstanding branches. It's more like in the center of the tree, not going anywhere, but it's pretty freaking cute. So I wanted to add it here. Some of the smaller ones like Lurianosaurus. What I want to talk about next is one of the most famous theropods, is Allosaurus. We'll talk about Allosaurids. So those are the true Allosaurs, because we were talking about Allosauroids up till now, but the true family of Allosaurus lives here in the late Jurassic. We have Allosaurus here, not the largest theropod, but still one of the apex predators living in the era. Here is a size comparison to a T-Rex, so you can see that the T-Rex was actually much, much larger. But still, when you compare it to a human, an Allosaurus wouldn't have much of an issue making a dinner out of us. And yes, we know for sure that Allosaurus hunted Stegosaurus. The reason why we know it is because we have a fossil of it taking a shot to the balls from a Thagomizer. So this is a piece of a pubis bone. You can see a fossilized abscess here, and you can see an entrance and exit wound. So yes, it took a Stegosaurus spike right to the nut. Here is an additional visualization if you need it. And this is a definitive proof that they did attempt to hunt Stegosaurus. They were kind of metal. They also hunted themselves. We have proof of Allosaur cannibalism. This is an Allosaurus bone with an Allosaurus tooth mark, for example. And a little bit of art about it, some with speculative feathers, some with less. The characteristic is those two weird bony protrusions over their eyes. Here is a more feathery reconstruction of an Allosaurus, a little bit with a backdrop of the environment. FYI, that snow is accurate. Late Jurassic was getting colder. Actually, it was when the climate was starting to cool down a little bit. And here, what is likely a female and a male next to one another. Some speculative coloration on the face, some more feathering. We don't know actually how much coverage there actually was on the face and on the body of it. And finally, a comparison with Jurassic World. Jurassic World actually got it pretty good. You can see those bony protrusion over the eyes. Size-wise, the animal was also accurate. So good for them. So while Allosaurus wasn't a very big Allosaurid, Sarophaganax was. This is the largest Allosaurid that we know of. And you can see the size comparison here. So Sarophaganax maximus. This is the one that we should be talking about, not Allosaurus. It was pretty metal, but since it's not as famous, it doesn't have as much art. So Allosauridae are here. They don't live very long. They actually live for about 10 million years, so they are not a very successful group of animals. But when you look at their full family tree, Allosauridae, they live until 88 million years ago, so much longer. And the group of animals that we carry on that lineage is here. So what are those secondary Allosauroids? What is that second family? They are called Carcharodontosauria. A little bit of a mouthful, but they lead to a very famous dinosaur that I will tell you about in a moment. For now, they are pretty small, like Lusovenator here. Again, similar to Allosaurus at this point. What makes them a little different is that they have much more chunkier center of the body mass. You can see that body is much bigger and looks a little less agile than Allosaurus did. What it will lead to here is this animal. This is Giganotosaurus. This is a late Cretaceous animal that was bigger than a T-Rex. So you probably heard about it here and there. This is that family tree. They will never actually meet with a T-Rex, but yes, it was bigger, and we'll talk about it in the Cretaceous. There's one more part of this family tree. We won't be talking about it today because it actually starts in the Cretaceous. Instead, where we will end are Tyrannosaurs. So Pantyrannosauria leading to this most famous dinosaur. Duratyrant is one of them. They are starting to get a bit bigger. Last time you saw them, they were about the size of a cat. So you can see that the body size starts to increase here. Stoxosaurus is actually, as far as I know, the only known English theropod, and it is a Pantyrannosaur as well. Here it is just chilling on the coast. And this is where we get to the end. I'm almost on time, just 2 more minutes. So, end Jurassic scene. We have Stegosaurs, two-legged ornithischians, some basal mammals. We have an Allosaurus chilling here in the trees, some sauropods in the back, pterosaurs, and so on. You can see it is a little colder. There isn't that much sun. It's not very tropical at this point. Yes, it did get colder. You can see a different shot of the environment here. We don't have ceratopsians, for example, here, not the big ones, 4-legged ones. So, when we reach this boundary between the Jurassic and the Cretaceous, what happens? And the answer is not much, actually. But there is a need for the boundary, because if it wasn't for that, the Jurassic Cretaceous combined together would have been just a huge swath of time. So the scientists wanted to find a good place for a boundary. The other reason why we don't know much is because the fossil record is very poor as we enter the Cretaceous. It is one of the most lacking pieces of time when it comes to fossils we have at all. There are a few theories about what happens though. Like the end of the Jurassic is an era of increased geological activity. The breakup of the continents is ending, and we have a few meteor impacts. And as I told you, there is a climate cooling. It gets a little bit colder. So we do actually have a few extinctions at the end of the Jurassic. I will tell you what dies in a moment. And all those things could be the reason for them. We don't know for sure. It could also be an artifact of the fossil record. You can see here that the amount of fossils in the early Cretaceous just collapses completely, only to explode later on in diversity. So it might be that we just don't have enough information. A few groups of the animals that are affected, that die, are large theropods. Some of the large theropod groups will die off. Lots of Thalattosuchians will die. Marine invertebrates and reefs will get impacted heavily. All in all, this is not a major extinction though. It's probably one of the minor ones, and certainly one of the most enigmatic. We don't know that much about it. However, just a quick book checking. What is dead at the end of the Jurassic? So first, before this event, those things on the left are already gone. What dies at the end of the Jurassic are those things. So basal ceratosaurs, those guys are alive. Megalosaurs die, and allosauroids die also. But Carcharodontosauria and the rest of them carry on. In the Maniraptoriforms, the only group that died off are Scansauropterygids, so those cool bat-like winged animals. In the Avialae, the only group that dies are Archaeopterygids, so Archaeopteryx and its relatives. Then don't make it out of the Jurassic. However, Archmonavis, this transitional form between them and the rest of the family tree, is still here. With Eusauropoda, the only group that dies off are Apatosaurinae, so the relatives of the Brontosaurus. What is interesting is that all those sauropods will die before the end of the Cretaceous, before the asteroid hits. So a little bit of a teaser. The group of sauropods that will carry on until the end, that will emerge at the very start of the Cretaceous but isn't here yet, are called titanosaurs, and we will talk about them in the future. With ornithischians are doing great. All of those groups are alive. The only things that are gone are those basal forms leading into stegosaurs and ankylosaurs. So all in all, this is a very rudimentary math that I'm doing here, but I want to show you just the sheer increase in diversity throughout the Jurassic. We started with very few dinosaur families and end up with just hundreds of percentage of increase when it comes to the numbers of types of dinosaurs. With sauropods, it's actually more than 200% because, yes, we started with 4 groups, but those 4 groups died, but 8 new ones rose to take their place. So you can see this is what the Jurassic is. It is the emergence of the dinosaur family tree, and the Cretaceous will just take it further. The most important thing that happens though is this is the end of the free migration. The continents have broken up and the dinosaurs can no longer move freely between continents. And this is great news because if there is one thing that drives evolution more than any other are geographical limitations, isolation. The more things are isolated, the weirder they will get, the cooler they will get, and the most famous. And this is what will start driving the evolution of those famous and unique life forms in the Cretaceous. But this is where the story of the Jurassic ends. And with that said, I will see you in the Cretaceous. So thank you all for sticking with me throughout this series. I hope you enjoy the Jurassic, and I hope after this 4 streams, whether you watch all of them or just a few, you have learned something about the period and that we have managed to get rid of some myths. For the record, I only started work on the Cretaceous streams right now, so I'll take a bit of a break. We'll probably, hopefully we'll have an opportunity to pick this up starting next year, maybe January, maybe February. We will see. So I hope this will be enough time for all of you to cultivate some dinosaur hunger until we are ready to go back to this subject. So this will be uploaded to my YouTube later. I will share the link on my Twitter and in the Paradox Slack channel if any of you want to revisit those streams later. Right now, the only question from me is if any of you have questions, ask them now. I have like 5 more minutes to kill. And if not, I will be bugging off and I will be seeing you next time. We have something interesting to say about dinosaurs. I'm not seeing any questions yet. I suppose this was... Do I have a favorite picture of a yelling dino? Well, actually, I do, but it is in the Cretaceous, so I won't show it to you today. For the record, though, it is a Tyrannosaurus. So I can tell you that much. So it will be shown at the very end of the Cretaceous series because Tyrannosaurus lives at the very end of the Cretaceous. And for the record, people, those of you who stuck until now, let me just tease Cretaceous a little bit, which is that Jurassic, I did my best to make it interesting. I hope you have enjoyed it, but it is much less interesting than the Cretaceous. all the really cool shit happens in the Cretaceous. It is my favorite geological period, and I hope in the future when you watch it, you will think so too. Okay, this is it. I see people are running off to resume their work, so I will do the same. Thank you again for joining me today. And with that, I will be signing off for today. See you around.